Tacitus today. Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. As you're probably aware from other videos, I try and keep track of the ratio of the number of immigrants coming into Australia versus the amount of jobs that are available. So, and the backdrop of this is Western governments all across the West, and the Australian government's no different. Falsely, in fact, it's an outrageous, grotesque untruth, falsely claims that there are massive skill shortages in Australia and elsewhere around the West. But using Australia as the example for the moment, they claim that there are massive skill shortages which can only be addressed through mass black and brown peasant immigration. Now, the claims of the shortages are in doctors, engineers, and nurses, and so on, which is, you can create an artificial shortage. Just say, well, in Australia, we're going to stop training doctors. We'll just stop. No more doctors being trained. Or we need 100 doctors to be trained, but we'll only train 10. So that we'll create this artificial, deliberately and willfully, treacherously manufacture the shortage of doctors. So then we run around and go, oh, look, there's no doctors. We don't have enough doctors. The only thing we can do is go to Bangladesh or some dirt poor, corrupt shithole and get doctors from there. That's our only solution. Nothing else we can do. Our hands are tied. That's the fucking bullshit they put on us. But just looking at where these alleged shortages are now. I get around looking at firms. There's a firm that was hiring a technician for some technical equipment. I mean, it wasn't super high tech, but it needed a 1-year training course to do, and you had to have completed high school or have a technical college education and that sort of thing. So now they put out an advert recently and. To looking for someone, and they had, I think it was 20 or 21 applicants. The CEO was telling me, and he said, 2 of them were absolutely top drawer. There's another 2 that were very good, but any one of the 21 he could have hired. And he sort of thought there's maybe a few more applicants than he would have suspected, but he thought he'd get a few. Now, it's not in a field that's where these folks are thick on the ground. There's just people out there that have these sort of technical expertise. So you had 20, 21, or 20 or 21, I think it was 21 applicants. As I say, two of them were like wow factor level of, so he claimed, wow factor level of expertise, and 2 more were very, very good. So he had no short, easily picking. He didn't have to pay, extra money to attract somebody. In fact, he said he could probably pay a little bit under the card to get somebody if there were this many good quality people around. Now, I've heard these sorts of things elsewhere in different roles and categories. Now. There's supposed to be a shortage of civil engineers, but if that is the case, then why are civil engineers being paid less than a first year diversity officer in an HR department? Explain that to me if you can. There's no shortage of diversity officers, but they're everywhere. So it's a job that almost anyone can do. Your only credential needs to be: do you hate straight white males? Bingo, job's yours. You're lesbian, job's yours. So these are there's no shortage of these people. There's a gazillion angry, hate-filled lesbians around the place who can do that job. Yet the job pays quite well. I mean, it should pay really shit money for what it is, but it actually pays quite well. You can be paid $120,000 a year, or between 90 and 120,000 to be an entry level in the diversity department. Whereas a civil engineer with 5 years experience, I mean, you'd be in charge of building a bridge worth $2 million, that sort of thing. You'd be the head dude. and yet they're paid $90,000 a year. So this gives you an idea. But there's when someone puts out an advert for civil engineers and these sort of things, maybe they're not killed in the rush, but there's certainly enough people who are prepared to work for less money than a diversity officer gets paid. Now, I can't find a skilled job where people where the employers can't hire somebody. Either the employer is wanting to pay well below the sort of the notional market rate for that job, or there's very tenuous employment conditions, or there's like lots of travel, or there's another factor there that's causing people to either not apply or they don't last very long. High staff turnover. There's one CEO was moaning and whinging to me that he can't find people, but he hires these relatively high quality sort of technical people, and they only last 6 weeks and they're gone. And he raves about, oh, they're all useless, they're all assholes. No, they're not. You treat them like shit, you fucking idiot. That's why they go. And then you whinge and moan that you can't find anyone. So, but that aside, he's still getting plenty of people applying. So there's no shortage of skilled people that I can find. Now there are shortages. Say somebody wants a stonemason with 15 years experience, for example, and they want this person to work out in the middle of fucking nowhere, out in the sticks, in the middle of nowhere, and they say, well, we can't get anybody. Now they could get somebody. They could pay a particularly good wage, or they could offer benefits like, so we'll pay your wage and we'll give you free accommodation, or something, just add benefits to it. And they could get people to do that, but they won't. They say, no, we want to pay the minimum rate for that job, and we want to whinge and complain that we can't find a very experienced, top-notch dude to work out in the middle of nowhere, where the nearest school is a million miles away and that sort of stuff. So that's not a realistic sort of thing, and they're not responding to market forces. You can get someone if you want. You've just got to keep on upping the benefits and the salary until you get somebody. Now, some of the owners of businesses out in the remote areas say, well, look, if I pay somebody that much to get out here, then my business is not viable. Well, that's another discussion, but if your business isn't viable, then you've got the problem here in do you need to be in another business? Do you need to relocate? You want to stay in this area, and you want to stay on this farm that your family's owned for generations. That's fine. You go and do that. But can you still be in the stonemasonry business if you want to pay someone minimum bucks? And clearly you can't. That's not work. It won't work. You do not have a viable business model in this area. You've got to change that business model. So trying to force people to work for shit money under shit conditions because you don't have a viable business model is in itself crazy and insane. So and that's another discussion to be had there. But there's no shortage of people out there. It's just a shit job in a shit location, and he's not prepared to provide any additional benefits. But looking around, I can't find a single, and I'm sure there is one, but in the cities, I can't find a single well-paid technical job where there is any shortage of skilled people to fill them. Now, on top of that, there's a lot of companies that are now doing public service departments and so on, doing the affirmative action race gender quota thing. So they're replacing competent white people, straight white males, with useless, low quality, piss poor affirmative action hires, which is creating even more pressure in terms of getting the job done, putting even more pressure on the white people who are remaining to do the job and to train up, or try and train up as best they can these low IQ, low quality affirmative action people that have been put in there. So, but again, there's no shortage. I recently saw, and I mentioned another video where there was a somewhat technical and quite a senior managerial role that was in one of the big companies, and we had to, our project we were working on was effectively put on hold until they hired this person. And we often get that where parts of the project have to stop while they hire or replace someone or whatever. And we were staggered when we came into for the big meeting where this person was there. It's a woman, I don't know, late 20s. And her previous job was like an activist at an NGO group. I mean, she's got no qualifications or credentials, even remotely that would qualify for this job. So they've passed over hundreds, if not thousands. It would be thousands of better qualified people to employ this snot-nosed activist, leftist activist from a fucking NGO who's got no relevant experience. Who's, by the way, had a 3.5 times increase in their salary. I mean, what the fuck? So again, there's no shortage of qualified people. They didn't have to hire someone that unqualified, for goodness sakes. But it was it was an affirmative action, race, gender, and all that sort of stuff, box ticking exercise. Now the other thing is that a lot of jobs, a lot of companies are trying to reduce every job, brain surgery, call it what you like, reduce every job to a checklist, and so the person doesn't really need to know anything according to this ideology of checklists. Doesn't really need. You've got your checklist, you've got your KPIs. Off you go. You can do anything and everything. So any job, no matter how technical or complex or nuanced, any job is something that anyone can do, and that, of course, is absolutely utter nonsense. But that's the sort of the flip side or the backside of the affirmative action, race, gender, quota hiring. Well, okay, so who cares if we've hired an IQ 80 black lesbian? They don't need to understand the job anyway because we give them a fucking checklist. And you come across these checklist people everywhere now, in positions that they just really shouldn't be in, and just they don't know what to do, and they just pull out the checklist or they download a checklist from the internet, and then they've got no idea what they're talking about, and looking with glazed eyes at their own fucking checklist. So there's no shortage of skills. Now let's have a look at the areas where there are technically at least shortages of people, or where, more shortages is the wrong word, where employers are finding it hard to fill the jobs. These are the casual jobs with random casual hours that change all the time, that don't pay a decent hourly rate, where you can turn up for work and they go, no, we don't need you now, off you go. All these sorts of things, and where you can be fired at the drop of a hat, where they secretly try and force workers into being trainees or interns without pay for as long as they can squeeze them, and that sort of thing. So these are things like pizza delivery jobs or those type of job, working in cafes, restaurants, and hospitality, and that type of thing. That's where there's the real shortage of people. Now, those jobs aren't necessarily advertised on the online job boards, so it's much more difficult to quantify. In fact, it would be impossible to quantify. You could only take a general guess. But say I walk down the main street of the town I live in, there are most of the takeout food shops, the cafes, that sort of thing. Most of them have got signs in the window, handwritten signs saying "help wanted" or "worker wanted" or "chef wanted" or "barista wanted" or this sort of thing. But again, it pays shit money, and there's no reliable amount of hours. Maybe you get a few weeks over particular vacation times where you might get regular work, but otherwise, you come into work not knowing how many hours you're going to need to be there for. They want you on call, so people have to sort of pretty much be walking around with a phone and nearby. If you're on call, we expect you to be here in half an hour or 15 minutes or something. So you have to be nearby. You can't go anywhere or do anything. So even though you're not being paid, they effectively want you on standby out the front door without having to pay you. And my view is that if any employer wants that sort of standby, then they've got to fucking pay for it. But they take it out of the time, and they pass the cost and inconvenience on to the worker there. And again, I think if that's what you have to do to run your business, you don't have a viable business model anymore. It's simply not a viable business. that's what you have to do. Now, business owners I know who own like cafes and or restaurants, and they go, well, look, I have to do that, otherwise I can't afford my lifestyle. And my lifestyle involves, driving a top-of-the-range car and living in a nice house and sending my kids to a nice school. So I need to screw those workers. I need to pay them shit money. I need to be able to pass the cost of doing business with my non-viable business model. I need to pass the cost of the business onto them. If they want a fucking job, they can damn well fucking put up with it. So that's the attitude there. Now, whether it's personal enrichment of the owner or a non-viable business model all round is almost academic, but these are the jobs that are harder to fill. Now, the only people who work those jobs are immigrants who are living communally, 20 to a two-bedroom apartment or one-bedroom apartment or something like that. They're the only ones that can really do it, just for their own economic viability. And because they're sending their money back to Bangladesh or Pakistan or somewhere, India, because they're not spending their money on social life and things like that, they just are sitting around in their apartment all day or sitting out in the front, the front garden or something like that, defecating in the gutter and all that. And then they're available when the phone rings. They can get straight over there. But it's only people living that sort of communal third world lifestyle can do it. So that's where the immigration can fit in. But in reality, none of these jobs are unfillable. None of them are unfillable, and they never used to be unfillable. Before mass immigration, there was never a shortage of workers to do these jobs, whether at the chain takeouts, stores like Pizza Hut or McDonald's or something like that. There was always enough kids, people to do the job, always. But suddenly now there's not enough people, whereas there used to be a surplus of people. I remember, as a kid, because I did the same thing. Pushed a broom in a warehouse, and did all those sort of shit jobs over the summer vacation, the holidays. I mean, back in those days, it was like you made $20 a week, for fuck's sake. I thought that was good money. But there was no shortage of kids. I remember kids who couldn't get work, at school. Gee, how did you get that job, Billy Bob? I wanted to, I've been looking for weeks and can't find one. So there was a surplus of kids available to work at those sort of casual jobs in cafes and restaurants. But today, they're saying there's this terrible shortage. But the shortage isn't because there's no people to do it. It's because it pays shit money with shit conditions with a huge amount of uncertainty. So coming back to it, there is no shortage of labour in this, no shortage of workers in this country or anywhere in the West. There's a shortage of cheap labour that's prepared to work under shit conditions and with great uncertainty. That's where the shortage is. And if any government decides to tighten up the employment law to say, hey, you can't you have to give somebody 2 hours, a day's notice if you want them to come in and work. And I think the owner of the cafe said, well, I don't know if it's going to be busy tomorrow. Suddenly a lot of people can walk in the door and want coffee and sandwiches or something like that. And then I want to be able to call and have people come in. No. Your business model isn't viable if that's what you have to do. So really, you need to have a different business model, or you need to pay people to a minimum amount of people to be on staff to handle it when customers walk in the door. No, the solution is to pay people $1 an hour, and that's the solution. No, it's not the fucking solution. So there's a lot of work needs to be done. A lot of heavy lifting needs to be done, I think, on the policy front on how to make these small businesses viable and in what way they can be viable without screwing the worker or having insane business models. Now, there's an entire sections of the Western economy where none of the businesses are viable. None of them are viable, and they're relying wholly on imported labour that they treat like shit or underpay. Now, this gives a huge advantage to things like the Chinese and Indian takeout food shops, because they import their buddies from the rural tribal village using all sorts of corrupt methods and practices to get them out here, and they put them 20 to or there's one I can think of now where there's 11 people living in a one-bedroom apartment, and then they deduct money for they pay them the proper wage, and they work them full time, but then they deduct from the wage the rent, the cost of bringing them out here from India or China. They deduct food cost and so on. So really the person makes no money at all, and the small amount of money is left over they send back to fucking India or somewhere to the family, which one of the local mafia goons then takes a 10% cut of that, and so on. So hugely corrupt practice. But what it means is the local Indian, Chinese takeout food shop or restaurant or cafe or whatever it is, that they can operate at a cost that a local operator couldn't possibly operate at. And that corruption and those practices need to be really stamped out, because if they were paying their illiterate Indian peasant buddies the proper wage and the proper conditions, their business wouldn't be viable, and so that it really needs to be addressed. This idea of this huge sectors of the economy that are simply not viable and are reliant on peasant labour, that really needs to be addressed, because it's causing resources to be dragged into that sector that are artificially being propped up, by this by these scams, these overseas scams are being practiced. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.